the practice of writing a book I had given up on because I had said to myself, I'm dumb. Not really, but it kind of sounded like that. Like, okay, the academic arts are not mine. Look, I proved it. And then when my wife asked me to write a book, I was like, honey, I'd rather go into combat. So trying to write a book for me was 10 times harder than combat because I'd had my own self-imposed stopping point. And I went and interviewed some great authors, and all they said to me was how easy it is. And here's one of them said, writers write. Oh, well, I can write. I write 100 emails a day. I can write. They're like, just write 1 page a day. If you write 1 page a day, you would be the most prolific author in the world.
Namaste. You're listening to the Savannah Podcast. Join us on an exploration of Eastern spirituality, yoga philosophy, and conscious living for the new age. This podcast is a production of SavannahSpirit.com, where you can find a large selection of Om and yoga clothing, spiritual jewelry, and unique fair trade gifts from the Far East. Now here's your host, Ashton Szabo.
Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the Savannah Podcast. We've got a very interesting show in store for you today. But before we dive into the topic, I want to remind you, go over to SavannahSpirit.com/contest. Enter in each week for the chance to win a $100 gift card for SavannahSpirit.com. And today we're going to be exploring concepts like mindfulness in chaos and how to integrate oneself into a culture that disconnection is one of the defining characteristics of it. We're going to talk about stress and all these different things, but we're going to actually bring it from quite a different perspective than the one we're used to. Instead of the flowery language of yogis, we're actually going to be talking to a former Navy SEAL. Our guest today is Thom Shea. He's a former Navy SEAL sniper who served for 23 years. He's now the CEO of Adamantine Alliance, a unique leadership and human performance coaching organization. He's also the host of the Unbreakable podcast and the author of Unbreakable, a Navy SEAL's Way of Life. Thom, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I do appreciate it.
We're excited to have you. It's definitely a different perspective than the one that we typically have on the show. So I'm excited to see where our conversation goes.
As am I.
But to start, tell us a little bit about your time as a SEAL and how it led you into the specific work that you're doing now with human performance and coaching and your Unbreakable podcast. How did it all lead up to that?
Where to start that story? I started the story, I'd have to start it at an earlier date if you don't mind, and I'll try to break through it quick. I started the story of SEALs early in life, where I grew up in southern Indiana in a small community, and I'd grown up with a Navy SEAL as a friend. And the story then takes me to, I was at West Point and I failed out. And that being a point in my life where I learned that I was out of balance, something about me, about something that was the center focus of that coming to end. And now that I'm out of West Point, I go home with my tail between my legs like every great kid would go home, And that SEAL that I'd grown up with asked me a question that led me to be a SEAL. He said, now that you failed, what do you really want to do? You can't go any further down. And I said, I want to be a SEAL. And so I actually went back to school first, completed that, because I think there's a measure of balance that you got to achieve in life, and being out of balance doesn't help. So for me to balance my life at that point, I had to complete it. And so I graduated from Ball State University with a degree in sports med, because I kind of knew the body. I just didn't know how to make money with that, So I signed up for SEAL training my senior year, and I didn't even know how to swim. I just knew that I wanted it, which led to me going to SEAL training through the path of enlisted. And I became a medic, or a combat medic. And because I liked the body and I liked the medical side of it. And then I end up at SEAL training into another regime of constant being bombarded with failure, and went through what they call Hell Week 5 times. I was one of the only 2 guys that have done that dumb thing 5 times. And so it led to a very interesting career. Since I'd already experienced being out of balance, I knew how to get back in balance. And I knew how to thrive in chaos, is what I call that situation. And the true chaotic experiences in life that I don't recommend them to anybody is combat. And I found in those areas in combat, I actually thrived. And culminating in 2009, I led a SEAL platoon of 22 guys into Afghanistan into true chaotic experiences, and we all survived. And I found some learning points to that now that after I retired, I was able to teach people in the business community that were things that I had learned that dramatically affect their life, which is what I call performance, how humans perform. And it led me to being asked to go into businesses and train individuals and talk to colleges, and has led to this podcast. That's it in a nutshell. Sorry.
Well, you bring up a number of topics that I want to dive into today, and I guess we can start a little bit about this idea of thriving in chaos itself. Because I mean, if you only look at social media these days, you think everything is chaos. Period. Not that the world is necessarily an expression of that, but I think a lot of people are feeling in their minds that things are out of control right now, no matter what side of a political spectrum someone might be on, that the world is just going a little cuckoo. And a lot of people are breaking down because of that. And one of my thoughts of just, wow, I mean, you've served in 3 different wars, correct? And I just imagine that the amount of stress that you're under in those moments. I mean, stress is such a huge thing in our culture today, but for the vast majority of people, they're not worrying about whether or not they're going to get shot, or like their life isn't necessarily in jeopardy, but they're in this state of stress. And I'd imagine when you're in an environment like a war zone, I mean, you can't just step away and be like, you know what, I'm gonna put the pause button on. Like when you're playing as kids and you're like, whoa, time out, it's too much. Like you don't get to do that in a war zone. So you have to learn to either adapt or you crack. And so I'm curious specifically about some of the tools that you gained in taking it from that obvious necessity of being focused all the time, highly to your environment, which the body is designed to do, but not really designed to do all the time. It needs those rest states. And if you're not getting them, then there's the burnout on the other end. So you have to learn to manage that focus and stress skillfully. What are some of the things that being in those types of environments taught you about how to manage stress levels in chaotic environments?
Wow, that's a good question. I'd have to tell it in regarding something that you and I could talk about. Otherwise, I think it's a little abstract. And here's what I mean by that. So, and I'm sure your community doesn't even know this. SEALs do yoga. It's captured differently. Sometimes yoga, teachers come in and because we always want to get the best at an art to come and teach us it, because it represents a mental and physical balance. So let's talk about that experience of yoga. So any position. So at any posture, pose in yoga, you get that point where there's resistance. In combat, it's the same thing. So everything's good until you get right there. And in that position, it's hard to breathe. But the only thing you can do is keep breathing. So what I'd learned in chaotic situations is it's better not to want to get out of the situation. So say you're I can't do all the poses and I already know all the names of them. So but there's resistance in a pose. The only thing you can really do is breathe in it. You can back out of it, but you still have to get into it. Being in that moment is what can be learned. And, the master practitioners of yoga, they learn to breathe in the hard poses. The easy poses don't take anything. So in combat's the same way. Your body tends to not want to be there. The people that are actually thriving in those moments find a way to be there. So when you're getting shot at or you're tired, you're exhausted, whatever the condition is, that's the moment of the pose where everything's out of control. The key is breathe. And when you breathe, everything comes back. So that's how what I consider thriving in the moment. The other one is, when do you rest? You rest whenever you can take a moment and not die resting. So a lot of people don't understand that you can't stay alert all the time. I think there's a rule of thumb that's I think is a some neurologists would be able to validate this, and I don't know the exact ruling on it, but humans can only concentrate for 90 seconds on one thing. They can immediately concentrate for another 90 seconds on something else, but you try to think of the color blue. 90 seconds in, it turns to green or pink, or you start thinking of something else. Combat's the same way. You can't be always on. Masters find a way to check out for about 5 seconds and then come back. And I had learned to do that simply because of the amount of training that you do in chaos. You learn, okay, now I can check out. It looks like I'm doing something, but I'm not. I don't need to have all my senses popping. And so, but you learn that if you survive Hell Week, you learn how to turn off and on rather quickly. And that is a learnable trait. That's what I think. That's one thing I can teach, is there is not all-time focus. There's not the escape of the moment, I think, is what our society wants to do. In a chaotic situation, we think peace is possible. Peace exists by being there. And once you understand that combat is not such a negative situation, it's just where you are. Either you're going to be all in, or you're going to be halfway. Halfway gets you killed, or you leave. You go back home. And sometimes you don't get the choice. So if you don't have a choice, you might as well choose to be there with everything. I don't know if that necessarily answers it, but having been asked that question so many times, what did I gather from that is being in the moment is the only thing that's possible. And few people are teaching it. You learn it in yoga. You learn it in, whatever that position is or pose is, just be there, breathe through it. And oh my gosh, it relaxes. So that's another great aspect of what I'd learned and that I took away from that is in the moment, everything is possible. And it lasts 90 seconds, and then check out for a little bit and then get back in the game.
Another thing you mentioned in your intro was this idea of failure. And I think it's something that is a pretty complex issue, especially in America and in North America and the United States today, where people are terrified of failure, or they simply don't understand what to do with it. If they fail, they think, oh, well, that just means, it's one of the, especially in the sort of yoga new age communities, you get a lot of like, well, you got to just go with the flow. And if things aren't working out, then it wasn't meant to be. And so if you fail, then it's just let it go. And then they wonder why they can't actually achieve goals in the physical world. I mean, you touched on it, but I heard you had said before too, you failed SEAL training 5 times. You failed out of West Point. I mean, there's anyone that's achieved anything in life fails all the time. So it's a matter of a relationship to failure, I think, that really propels us forward. Can you talk a little bit about how your failures have really shaped all of your successes later on in life?
Well, and given the aspect of what you guys are trying to accomplish, and having read a little bit about what your objectives are, Eastern philosophy, 3,000 years ago in China, one of the masters, and I if I was good at names, I'd say it. I just can't remember the guy's name, but I remember this reading it as a growing SEAL. So 3,000 years ago, one of the Chinese masters said, until you've done something 10,000 times, don't evaluate it or judge it. That's one of the translations of it. That's the epitome of failure. 10,000. Where in any society do we embrace this conversation called do it 10,000 times? Nowhere. Like I don't have to learn anything. I can just order it online. I don't have to go through the visceral experience of 10,000. Look at probably every yoga practitioner that has done it for a while. They've done that pose 10,000 times. Then they're good at it. Most of us try something the first time. It hurts. doesn't feel comfortable. Your brain gets erratic going, okay, this isn't you. The distinguishing moment of conversation said, this isn't me. It feels bad, so it's not meant to be.
This doesn't feel natural.
Yeah, with my ankles behind my ears, it shouldn't be there, And so all that, that's just a human phenomenon. But when the masters realize, keep doing it and you'll adjust. That's what adaptation is don't come up until you've done it so many times that then you can evaluate it. Now, okay, I'm not probably interested in doing it anymore. And in the SEAL community, everything is on a 10,000 iteration. You shoot, you deal with each other, you move, and you work out, and all those things that are elements, and you lead 10,000 times before you need to be called in as the leader. So that iterative training is the key to success. And why I said that on top of the failure thing is failure is just the sixth time that you've done it. Go back and try it again. And it won't work out for a while. And just like watching my little 10-year-old pick up a new video game. When he was 7, he couldn't read the instructions. He just figured it out. And if you're not there telling them, oh, you're doing that wrong, they'll just keep going until they get it. As adults, we try it once, and then we back away from it, which is a travesty. So I kind of learned early on that, failure, it's defining and it hurts and emotionally you're distraught. But if you don't say that is your defining moment, you can try it again. And for the longest time, which I bring that up, that my biggest failure was what I carried with me. And I had failed out in English, which I think is funny because I ended up writing a book. The practice of writing a book I had given up on because I had said to myself, I'm dumb. Not really, but it kind of sounded like that. Like, okay, the academic arts are not mine. Look, I proved it. And then when my wife asked me to write a book, I was like, honey, I'd rather go into combat. So trying to write a book for me was 10 times harder than combat because I'd had my own self-imposed stopping point. And I went and interviewed some great authors, and all they said to me was how easy it is. And here's one of them said, writers write. Oh, well, I can write. I write 100 emails a day. I can write. They're like, just write 1 page a day. If you write 1 page a day, you would be the most prolific author in the world because you talk yourself out of everything, And so I'd learned that aspect, and failure is just a learning point. So a post doesn't work on Tuesday. Try it again on Wednesday and on Thursday. So it doesn't work for 4 months. Doesn't mean that it's not the right condition. It's just you haven't figured it out yet. And I like the 10,000 iteration because it allows for failure, because everything then is just a learning lesson.
I was listening to a podcast of yours as well that you were talking about failure a little bit, but talking about people quitting. And I'm wondering too about sort of the semantics of just the word quitting, because you're also talking about, you just mentioned a moment ago of adaptation. And you were saying that in your business, you've pivoted so many times where you work towards something, it doesn't really seem like it's working out. Maybe you fail at something and then you pivot and you change your direction again. And for me, for example, there's a question that you seem to ask a lot, like what would your life be? What would your life be like if you never quit? And my thought with that was I was trying to think like, what have I quit at? And I'm like, there are things that I could, from a limited perspective, I could say that I quit. And I mean, absolutely growing up, there are things that I did quit. But as I matured in life, it wasn't about quitting one thing. It was learning how to adapt to situations to make my failures propel me into something else. So to me, it's not really quitting something. It's recognizing, here are these failures. This is what I'm learning about myself through that. And now I'm gonna pivot. I'm gonna shift direction. So how do you, in your work, kind of work around that idea of, what is defined for you as quitting versus adapting and pivoting and changing your direction?
You probably described it best. So quitting is when you quit on yourself. Self being, I'd have to describe it. So let me try to describe it short. It may lead to a longer discussion, but the only thing that I've seen at my age and in talking to a lot of masters in 5 areas: physical, intellectual, wealth, relationship, and spiritual. Spending a lot of time talking to masters in those areas. I have found that one thing is pervasive: language. Our ability to have language as a human being distinguishes us. And here's what I mean by that. Whatever you say you are, that's what you do. What happens in the phenomenon of quitting is we stop producing language for ourselves in that area. So, not knowing your past, so say that you had been a runner and you broke your leg. At that moment, you either quit on you or you use that as a learning lesson, but you don't quit on you. So one of the manifestations of you at that moment was running. Well, I can't run anymore. Doesn't mean I'm quitting on myself. I can bike or I can do yoga or whatever. What most people do, 85% of the people quit on that path entirely and never re-engage it. They lose the language of that, call it a dream or a passion, or I don't know what the Eastern philosophy would have the language for it, but they just quit on themselves. It's not a pivot. So like when you're running on a trail, you pivot all the time. You go up, over, you duck, under, but you're not quitting on that process of self-expression of running and moving from A to B. Sometimes people quit though. They hit an obstacle and they stop entirely. And if you ask them what that experience is like, they just say, that is not for me. And what I saw in talking to all those masters in those 5 categories is they all had the same language of being, B-E-I-N-G. Whoever they use the language of being to generate activity. And like Usain Bolt, I'm the greatest runner in the world. And then he goes out and manifests it. You talk to the people who quit, they say, I am not. And they prove it. So language is always there for human beings. I know that's a short-ended answer of a massively long discussion. And one of it's called neurolinguistics, your ability for language to produce action. That's the only thing that distinguishes human beings. And if you dive deep into people, language is driving them. It's the driver. And nobody's getting taught that. So if you acquire language, you acquire action in a millisecond. So, and not that you asked, but that's how battles and combat are won, is when the language leaves, the battle is lost, inevitably lost. And having learned that, you just learn not to give up. Learn not to give up on language. There's always a next step. There's always something more possible, but you have to create it using language. And it's very difficult to express that in 2 minutes.
You mentioned the 5 categories. One of the things that you teach on is what you call the 5 pyramids of human performance. Is that what you're speaking towards, or is that something different?
The same thing. So I use the category of, I call it category of pyramids, because an inverted pyramid represents how things naturally grow from something very small to something very big. Nothing grows from big to small. It's a terrible reference. And so I can't find more than 5 category or pyramids that everybody has in common. Health, if you want to call it health, everybody's learning. Everybody is acquiring value, which is wealth. Whatever, it's not necessarily money. It's just how you look at value, the work that you do and the life that you have. And everybody's in a relationship, whether they're on a mountain by themselves in a cave, there's still a relationship. And everybody and everything is spiritually connected. And language is driving those 5 areas, which is unique. When I found that, I was like, wow, that's unique. And then I see it everywhere now, which is the problem.
You just used a word there as well, which is definitely something I want to dive into, and that's spirituality. I grew up in martial arts. I was into MMA fighting for a number of years. I've been around jiu-jitsu my whole life. And when people find out as a yoga teacher, they're like, oh, you do martial arts too? They get all confused, and they're like, I don't understand how you fit those two together. For me, they were never separate. I mean, they were always an integral part of the same thing, just different sides of the same thing. The element, I've never have been in combat the way that you have in terms of the concern for my life. I've been in fights in real life and whatnot. Some of them, controlled in a ring, things like that. Some of them out on the street, but still not to the extent, obviously, that you've experienced. But the things, especially in the training in those realms, that you learn about yourself, that you learn about life and experience are so valuable, and things that you don't tend to come across when you're just, doing a forward fold and reaching down for your toes. You find when you're being pushed towards your limits. And I'm curious about what that experience, where I'd imagine a lot of people simply cannot relate to, especially in our modern American culture. What has that experience for you taught you about spirituality? Whatever that word might mean to you, or maybe if you want to start off defining that word. Or
I'd say the first layer of the definition of spirituality is that you are one of the funnels in which everything moves. And I wish I could define it better, that everything is connected and you're one of the filters and screens of those connections. And not to get, I don't think I'm very cerebral per se, but I don't know the nth degree to which everything's connected, but I know that it is. We have impact on everything, whether we think we do or not, we do. Just walk across the street, you impact things. And, you've read stories of butterfly effect, the butterfly flapping its wing in China affects world climate minutely, but it does. That's a description of it. Our five senses are our filters. And like any practice that you do in any martial arts, you get a deeper sense of those five filters, or those six filters, or the five senses, and the sixth one being the one that's hard to describe. And how I've seen that play is what I see affects me. What I say affects you. My ability to talk, listen, see, smell affects a great many things. Flowers affect things. The derivative of that is what you consume affects you. That is the first layer of spirituality in how I define it. The sixth one is the undefinable one, your sixth sense. How that shows up in combat is intuition. That you don't see, hear, taste it, but you know something is going on. And when you're in a great relationship with a man or a woman, you have those moments of sixth sense. Or if you have a kid, they could be at school and you turn your head going, I wonder how my kid's doing, not knowing because nobody gets trained in how to access that sense. So I just use the definition of that everything is connected across time, space, and distance. How you value and articulate that connection is crucial. And inside of that connection is also language, and having talked to religious leaders and spiritual gurus, here's the base language of that pyramid. I am connected. What if you led into everything that you did that you are connected? The outcome would be different. The opposite of that is when you say, I am disconnected. And if you lead a disconnected life, it's rough. If everything you do and touch is a connection point, it leads to a different place. But all the top masters actually said that we are connected to degrees we don't understand. And then you talk to other people that, hey, there's no connection to me and a tree. Oh, well, that's still language driving it. And I don't mean to be vague about it, but it was so how I applied that in chaotic situations is everything has a measurable connection. And when you get a intuition, move on it. And we did that. So SEALs tend to do that a lot, is they do things that can't be described because of the inordinate amount of time they spend in gray situations. Like, well, how did you know to look over there? I don't know. The hair on the back of my head kind of said turn left, and people stepping over landmines and doing things that you're like, how would he have known that? It's not in the five senses. It's in the sixth one. And the more you kind of understand that, you just got to move when intuition says move.
Do you feel like intuition has saved your life?
Oh yeah, probably more times than I could count. So here's a description of that. In the sniping world, long distance shooting is impossible, mathematically impossible to hit targets when the round itself goes from supersonic to transonic. It's just an unpredictable round, if you understand that. Very predictable when it's supersonic. When it goes transonic, it's very not, you just can't predict where it's going to go, so you don't even know where to aim. And out past 600 yards, you're no longer looking at the target. You're aiming into the wind. So out past 1,000, you don't even see your target. So if I were to tell you, I'm going to teach you to shoot at things you can't see, your brain goes, huh? And the five senses ain't helpful anymore. You're using your training to impact it, but there's something else undescribable that's doing the work as well. And that's one element. How that's attached to spirituality is that intuition is there and it's measurable, but you got to let go of the five senses. And having made a lot of long shots, I didn't see what I was looking at. Just you picture it inside of that headspace, and the bullet goes exactly where the picture in your head tells it to go. Your body's just doing what it's supposed to do.
You talked about disconnection, and it's something that I think a lot of people do, as you mentioned, feel in our modern culture. There's something kind of embedded in the way that we connect now that inherently creates a sense of disconnection. And one of the things that I've personally find challenging, so I lived abroad for 6+ years. I thought I was going to become a monk. I was kind of going down that path. Coming back into Western culture, it still to this day is a challenge for me to integrate into a society that that has different goals than ones that I have, and that inherently in and of itself feels quite disconnected in general. So to connect to something that is already feeling disconnected is a challenge. Now, I have friends, I lived in North County, San Diego. I have friends, I grew up with friends. My roommate for a number of years was a Marine. I had friends in the armed services. I know it's a big challenge coming back from combat and integrating into culture. And as someone who's served in 3 wars, I'm really curious about your insights into how you integrate back into this modern way of living here in the United States.
I don't think it's any different than what your experience of it is. The disconnection comes from me, not the environment. And what I mean by that is there is no fundamental difference between me and you except our experiences. The only way to connect you and I is to use language. If I say there's no way that you and I can relate to each other, we can't. You know what I mean? If I say that there's no separation between me and you and I could talk for days, because then I hear your experiences and I listen through no filter. Just I get to hear about what you're up to and your passions in it. And whether that is judgmental or not, doesn't matter. I get to listen to you without filters because I get that there's no difference between you and I. If I dwell on our experiences as fundamentally separating us, we're screwed. And so I find that it's easier to integrate when I know that the problem is me, not the society. And are there some people I can't connect with? Yes, and they're the ones I choose not to connect with for safety reasons, or I just not interested. But that's me. So people that get out of the military, they get stuck in, they want that same level of intensity, and it may not happen out here. That's their problem. You can get a deep intensity in any business or over a podcast or anything if you just let that intensity envelop and then take over. So SEALs don't have the biggest problem with that PTSD that other communities have. And there's a fundamental reason why. We chose to be there. We chose to be in the front leading edge of in that combat scenario. When you want to be there, then there's just injuries that happen. If you don't want to be there mentally, you're very tough to deal with. And then you take that same being stuck, I don't want this lifestyle, into my next lifestyle that causes the post-traumatic stress. Like, I don't remember combat being so bad. It was a pain in the ass. I thought I was going to die pretty much every time, but I didn't get stuck in it. And, we didn't lose anybody, which was better. But I've put a lot of SEAL buddies in the ground, And I learned also to walk away from those too, be emotional in the moment and then leave. But people get stuck. And so I say that because nothing new under the sun. The world's no different now than it was 2,000 years ago. We have new technology that gives us the artificial impression that the person that we're communicating with or what we're reading is actual and factual. And it throws us off when we find out that it's not. It's much easier to connect to people than it is artificially to connect to them. And don't follow what the media is saying, and you'll be happy.
You mentioned something there as well, if we can get into it for a moment, of having to bury friends of yours. And the word, and it's central in many Eastern philosophies, is non-attachment, is to say that there's a misconception that people often have that non-attachment or the way moving towards enlightenment means people don't feel anything, that they're supposed to just be stoic and not feel. But what you touched on and what all these great teachers have taught is it's not about not feeling. You feel it. But then you leave it go, and there's this old Buddhist story about these two monks, and they're walking by, and they're about to get onto a river, and there's this woman that's trying to cross, and now the monks are not allowed to touch women at all. And one of them goes, "Oh, well, let me help carry you across." So he puts the woman on his shoulders, and they walk across the river, and then he puts her down on the other side, and they keep walking the other way. And the other monk is just appalled. He's like, "Oh, you've broken your vows. You've touched a woman. This is horrible." And he's like, "No, man, like I was helping someone over there. I left her back at the riverbank. You're still holding on to her." This idea that there's nothing wrong with our emotions, our feelings, everything else, but it's the attachment that's creating all of this suffering. How has that been a necessity in your life to learn that yes, you can feel, it's not about suppression, but feel it, but don't stay attached to it?
Yeah, and the attachment is you can't keep carrying 200-pound weights on your back. You have to let them all go. And the SEAL community of constant bombardment with problems to solve that are unsolvable. If you don't learn to let go, you're stuffed. You won't get through the first year of training. Do people of my background not have emotions? I tell you what, they're the most emotional people in the world, except they do it fast. They let go fast, and then they move on to the next moment, because the next moment sometimes is all you have. And that's, everybody has that. Death is the only inevitable thing that we have. You may get away with not paying taxes. It's not death and taxes, it's death. And we don't learn how to embrace that phenomenon well in the United States. We hang on to it like it's meaningful in a way that devalues the whole experience. It should be felt uniquely in the moment and then let go of, which is one of the tools of one of my trainings. The third tool that I teach in this longer extended training is the art of letting go. Without it, you're not going to get very far. Driving down the road, if you get attached to the person cutting you off, you're stuffed the rest of the day. Emotionally, you're drained. If you learn to let go like the monk did, then the next opportunity is more available, and you've learned something from it. And when you get stuck, then problems arise so rapidly you can't even overcome them. You have to go back to the first thing and let it go. Once it's gone, wow, that's where the fun happens, is when you let go of all the things that have happened. And the quicker you do that, the more performance-centered that you can get.
I don't even know if this is possible, but can you, if you were to, distill everything that you've learned from your experiences, both in the intensity of your training and combat situations and everything that you've learned through that, and distill it into a very simple concept or idea that people can live by, who perhaps never are going to be in a situation like that in their lives, but can learn from the things that you've learned from that? Could you share? I believe your book was actually letters written to your child about the things you're experiencing and learning and things like that. Can you draw from that and distill to give people a crystallized idea of like, hey, you know what? If we only got 5 minutes to talk and this is it, this is what you need to learn from this whole lifetime of experience.
Yeah, this is actually learnable. So here's what I would do, not even distill it, just take out all the fluff. Everybody has this in them. And here's the first point of human performance in human life. Honor the words that come out of your mouth. Honor that they have value, and don't be flippant. The second one is don't give up on yourself. The third one is constant movement solves problems. The fourth one is to focus and learn to rest. Learn how to turn the switch on and off rather rapidly, like a fluorescent light that looks like it's on, but half the time the thing's off, The fifth one being learning to let go quickly. The sixth one is embrace failure. Embrace it. Love it. Cause it to see what's going on that you're lying to yourself about. The next one is mentor others on the things that you've learned so that their life can grow. And the final one is balance those 5 areas of your life every day. Don't spend one day not accounting for physical, intellectual, wealth, relationship, and spiritual. If you do those, look out. Your life changes the next day because you've let go. You've focused on the things that are important. You've taken rest. You've not coasted through life. What comes out of your mouth, you value. Therefore, you value what comes out of everybody's mouth. And you don't give up on yourself ever. And I think the first two are the most important. And the last one is balance everything all the time. Don't be so one-sided. Like the striving for no complications in life. Good luck. What if you just said, okay, what are we going to complicate today? Let's just complicate it. We know it's going to get complicated. Let's just do it up front. But balance everything. And then honor your word and don't give up as the premise for life. And then get out of the way because things are going to shift very quickly. Because then everything comes out of your mouth, you're going to take action on. I went a little long-winded on that, sorry.
Oh, no, that's okay. It's still, if it was an elevator conversation, it would make it in there. So that's basically what we're asking for. So it was great. Where can people find out more about your work, purchase your book, look up at your trainings and all the work that you do?
Well, our website is thomshea.com, and we have a private Facebook community, Unbreakable Thom Shea, and you can follow us on Twitter, I think, as Thom Shea. And I created something I'd like to share. We've created a test that allows, with 15 questions, to see how balanced people are in those 5 areas and their ability to produce breakthroughs in their life. And for some reason, it works. And that's a website called The Unbreakable Path. And everybody's on it, and it produces a wonderful footprint. And I want to say a little bit about the book on conclusion. So I wrote a book to my kids during combat out of a request from my wife, Stacy, to pass on to them what I wanted them to know about life that they could have without me there. There ended up being 13 lessons. 13 is the number that represents the promise of life if you're into numerology. And the book was originally titled Spartan Woman. Didn't make it through the publisher because I know from my background that without a powerful woman, men suck. And it just didn't make it through the edit. But I like to say that because without a beautiful partner, we're half of the person that we could possibly be. And thanks for allowing me to say that.
Absolutely. Well, and we're in complete agreement. I don't think I would be anywhere without my wife. And I know where I would be. I'd be hiding off in a cave from all the difficulties of the world. So absolutely, I think that's beautiful and wonderful. And I love hearing that about the book as well. So thank you so much for coming on the show today, Thom, and sharing your insights and your passion for the work that you do as well. I really appreciate your perspective on things and coming and share it with us.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks for the time.
And for all of our listeners out there, I hope you have learned something new. I hope you all have an incredibly present moment. And thank you so much for listening. Namaste. Hey everybody, it's Ashton here with an announcement. We're starting a weekly contest giveaway over at Savannah Spirit. If you'd like to enter into the contest to win one of our weekly prizes, go to savannahspirit.com/contest. If you enjoyed listening to the podcast today, we'd really appreciate it if you went over to iTunes, left us a review, leave us some comments, and share this podcast with anyone who you think might enjoy it. Also want to invite you to go check out Savannah East, which is the name of our blog and also the name of a Facebook group where I interact with guests and our audience. We'll post recent episodes up there as well as interesting articles relating to our guests and or the topics on the shows. And again, thank you so much for listening. Namaste.
You've been listening to the Savannah Podcast. To find out more about Savannah, go to savannahspirit.com or follow Savannah on Facebook at facebook.com/Savannah Spirit. For daily inspiration, check out our blog at savannaheast.com. Be sure to join us next week for a new episode, and thank you for listening to the Savannah Podcast.